Hurry! Go, keep going, hurry! Stop playing!
No, it's across the lake!
Stop playing!
It's across the lake!
Go!
This chilling surveillance footage, taken only a couple of weeks ago, shows the moments that Amouranth, one of Twitch's most popular streamers, was robbed in her home. And would you believe they were here for her millions of dollars of cryptocurrency? Meanwhile, half the world away, popular streamer Airi Sato was recording live in the streets of Shinjuku, and at the time had just over 6,000 viewers tuning in to watch her. But that is when all of a sudden her stream erupted to the sounds of blunt thuds and screaming, accompanied by the low voice of a disheveled man muttering the words, "I found you. Are you dead yet?" It appeared that Airi had been attacked in broad daylight, and it sounded like her killer knew who she was too. And with her camera still rolling, her audience, horrified as they watched the event unfold, would catch occasional flickers of the man, with the sound of distant sirens gradually getting closer. However, there is far more to this story than meets the eye. In fact, with every layer that you pull away, you're left with an entirely different one. And let's just say that nobody in this story is innocent. Welcome back to Coffeehouse Crime, folks. My name is Adrian, and today we're looking at two horrible stories that have recently happened which involve live streamers. This includes the case of Amouranth. We'll also be taking a look at how she and her husband responded, and how potentially that could have saved both of their lives. But before we get to that story, let's look at one which recently happened in Tokyo, because it seems that Western media has completely missed the mark here. Before we begin, please consider subscribing to see more true crime, strange and chilling stories. And now, with that said, please grab yourself a coffee and let's caffeinate while we investigate. This is the case of Airi Sato. Shinjuku, Tokyo. Welcome to one of Japan's most buzzing districts. Now, we've talked about crime here before, because although Japan does boast one of the lowest crime rates in the world, it does seem like whenever a murder happens here, the story behind it is absolutely wild. For those of you who haven't been, Shinjuku is not really just a place, but more like an experience. A neon jungle that never sleeps, where towering skyscrapers loom over winding alleyways, and it's said that the hum of the city never seems to fade here. By day, it's a business hub which is buzzing with suits and briefcases, but by night, it transforms into a cyberpunk fan's dream. Tall, blazing signs light up Kabukicho, which is Tokyo's infamous red light district, and in the background, smoky izakayas overflow with laughter, food, and clinking glasses. And if you get lost in the maze of Shinjuku Station, well, don't worry, you're not alone. It's the busiest and most chaotic station in the world, but that's the beauty of it. Because whether you're chasing nightlife, culture, or a quiet shrine hidden in the madness, Shinjuku will always deliver. However, on the morning of March the 11th, 2025, the residents of Takadanobaba, a neighborhood found in Shinjuku, were awoken by the terrifying sound of screaming. Responding to the commotion, neighbors and construction workers alike all peered down into the street to see the motionless body of a woman on the floor. And above her, a masked and hooded man, likely in his early 30s, was staring down at his victim. Witnesses reported hearing her scream several times before then suddenly falling silent. And despite clearly falling to the floor and being in a dire situation, her attacker, who seemed to assault her with a knife, made no effort to run away. In fact, it is reported that even after he was done with her, the man stood nearby while he waited for the police to arrive. And due to his calm demeanor, some people would even mistake him as a second victim. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a woman lying on the floor who seemed to have sustained several severe injuries. And I'm not talking about just one or two stab wounds here, but literally dozens. And to throw in a unique detail observed by the officers, they also found it very strange that there was a camera on a tripod right next to her body. When officers picked up the mobile phone, they were absolutely horrified to realize that she was in fact streaming at the time, with many people asking her if she was okay in the live chat. Through this live stream and also the ID found in her pocket, they realized that she was 22-year-old Airi Sato. Paramedics rushed to save her life, but unfortunately, she went into cardiac arrest shortly after and then was pronounced dead. As for her attacker, well, he actually did not run away from the crime scene. In fact, he was right behind the officers just waiting to be arrested. Of course, when they realized who he was, that is precisely what happened. So, at least so far, this story seems to be fairly cut and dry, and many of you are probably wondering, or even assuming, that this guy must have been some sort of lustful fanatic. Well, unfortunately, there is far more to this story than meets the eye, and like I said at the beginning, no one is innocent. But before we get to that, let's first take a look at who Airi Sato was, and why she was murdered. It turns out that Airi Sato was a well-known live streamer who went by the name of Imogami. She was a big name on the website WhoWatch.tv, which is a popular streaming site in Japan. In fact, after finding out about this website, I had quite a lot of fun browsing the random live streams on there. It gave me a very open lens to the Japanese way of Twitch streaming. And before you're wondering, no, this is not a sponsorship. So, Airi was very active on WhoWatch and actually was one of its top performers. She had also earned the Platinum Streamer badge, which is the maximum rank available on the website. And at the time, she had accrued more than 2,600 followers on here, which by the platform's standards is apparently quite substantial. From what I could find online, it looks like most of her videos centered around her talking to her fans, answering questions, and generally trying to entertain her audience. She would also occasionally undertake stream challenges, walk around outdoors, or talk back to those who were messaging in her chat. It looks like her primary focus was always on her community, which probably is how she achieved platinum so early. But Airi's beginning was actually not so peachy either. In fact, she had quite the troubling start online, and one that none of her followers were actually aware of. It all began in December of 2021, which is when a 42-year-old man named Kenichi Tako stumbled upon her stream. In what was initially a chance encounter would eventually kind of blossom into a complicated and troubled friendship. However, before he even knew it, he was utterly drawn in by her personality. And before you're wondering, this is not going to be your typical parasocial relationship, as we often see with many other streamers. Now, what initially began as merely watching Airi would eventually turn into Kenichi donating pom-poms, which is the website's form of currency. And although it was small amounts at first, it did end up escalating quite quickly. In fact, at his peak, Kenichi was sending more than 100,000 yen per month. Which is no small sum, by the way, because back then, that converted to nearly $1,000. And side note, wow, has the yen changed. What a great time to visit Japan. Now, obviously, Airi both noticed and accepted his generous donations. I mean, how could she not? At the time, she wasn't even a full-time streamer. She was still just a waitress at the local restaurant, trying to make ends meet. His generosity seemed to snowball over the months, to a sum of almost 400,000 yen in donations, the equivalent of $4,000 at the time. And it was at that moment that Airi decided to do something she had never done before. She reached out to him directly, and that was the instance that changed everything. Now, we know all of this because only a few days after her murder, the messages between the two of them were leaked. How this happened or who by, nobody knows for certain, but it does suggest that some serious internet security issues exist. Anyway, back to the moment that the two would officially make contact. Airi was unfortunately scheming, and by September of 2022, she had asked Kenichi if he could now start sending her money directly, not through the usual streaming platforms, but straight to her bank account instead. She initially dotted these requests between casual conversation, making small excuses like forgetting her wallet at work or needing the cash quite quickly. And the deceptive thing right here is that she also promised to pay him back. You know, like, hey, I know I've already been given $4,000, but do you mind giving me another $500 and I'll pay you back tomorrow? This was only the beginning, and unfortunately, Airi never returned these new loans, instead asking for more. Only 1 week later, she requested another 20,000 yen, and then some more, and then again. The excuses seemed to just keep rolling in, and Kenichi, entirely unable to say no, always complied to her demands. And there was one other problem too, and by other I mean absolutely massive. You see, Kenichi was not some sort of rich hedge fund kid or even a businessman. In fact, he wasn't even close to achieving an average salary. This poor man was basically broke and only just earned enough to have a roof over his head. Needless to say, he was not in the position to give some random streamer thousands of dollars. And so, when Airi found out about this, of course she asked him the big question. Where are you getting all of this money from? The real tragedy here is that Kenichi was actually taking out loans from big loan companies and then giving that borrowed money to Airi. Now, clearly, I think a certain level of common sense is absolutely required here, and you should be able to tell when you can and cannot afford to give donations. And as for Kenichi's position, I think that was kind of obvious. But people will do very strange things for love, whether that be sexual, romantic, or simply out of care. Kenichi really wanted to make sure that Airi was safe, and so, for him, that meant taking out 2 massive loans. Now, you would hope that after learning that a fan of hers was in such a vulnerable position, Airi would reject all further donations. But sadly, the terrible thing is that she wouldn't, and instead of stopping, she pushed him even further. She asked Kenichi if he could borrow some more money from other lenders he hasn't tried yet. Anything to get another 50,000 yen to her immediately. She would even go as far to teach him how to lie about his income to get approved. It was almost like she had done this before. So, the question here is, was Kenichi the only one to fall for her trap? By now, he was drowning in financial debt and ignored all creditors because he was terrified of what was coming. Even worse, his parents' own home was listed as the billing address, meaning that his family was now part of the mess and were absolutely furious with him. And yet, despite all of this and throughout the chaos, Airi seemed to remain indifferent. In fact, when he told her how scared he was, she would simply reply with, "There's nothing I can do." I mean, for someone who has tried so hard to keep you financially stable and secure, how can you then just turn it around and say, "Yup, sorry mate, but you're on your own"? So you might be wondering why. Well, from what we can tell, it does not look like he was looking for anything in particular. He never asked for any favors and didn't seem to ask for anything in return either. It looked like he was simply genuinely wanting to help her out. But even if he did want to say no, well, Airi, she knew exactly how to pull him back in with emotional manipulation. One night, Kenichi messaged her to say that he had applied for another loan for her, and her response, well, that was a single emoji with the word, "yeah." He said he hopes he would be successful, to which Airi replied, "I want to die if I can't borrow any money." Kenichi replied, "Stay alive," to which Airi said, "I can't live without you." Touched by this, he then replied, "I'm happy, me too, I can't live without you." And then came those 3 big words. Airi said, "Thank you as always, I love you." With these messages, it is fairly easy to see how Kenichi believed that Airi cared about him and maybe even loved him, when in reality, all she saw him for was a walking cash machine, one that could be easily manipulated. And eventually, that illusion would finally shatter. By early 2023, Kenichi was in dire trouble because creditors were now coming to the family's front door, of course leaving his parents deeply frustrated with him. And that's because he was now late on several repayments. He had actually loaned out more than 2.5 million yen from these companies, the equivalent of $22,000, and all of that money had made its way to Airi. Desperate to make ends meet, because, you know, he had absolutely no money at all at the time, he started asking Airi if she could start repaying him back. To begin with, Airi was full of excuses, but even that wouldn't last for long, because soon after, she would just simply ghost him entirely. On January the 30th, he asked for some cash to help with an upcoming repayment date, to which she replied if she could have 2 more days. He then reminded her on February the 2nd, to which he received no response at all. Kenichi then boosted her memory the next day, to which he was met with silence yet again, and although she promised to pay him back on the 5th, she then ignored all future messages on the 11th, 13th, 16th, and 26th. Both hopeless and helpless, Kenichi's sadness would eventually turn into anger, and there were 2 very good reasons for that. I mean, of course, to begin with, she was ignoring all of his requests, but Kenichi could also watch her live streams, where he saw that she was doing absolutely fine. In fact, not only was she receiving many donations from other people, but she also announced her engagement. In addition to this, he also found out that she was now living in a semi-luxurious apartment in the middle of Tokyo with her boyfriend, meaning that not only was she financially comfortable, but also safe, happy, and in love. Which is great, but of course, she was also not giving a single yen back to Kenichi. Meanwhile, he was living in squalor for her. Kenichi had been discarded, and as for Airi, well, she wanted nothing to do with him. And of course, this made him furious. But at first, Kenichi would at least try to fight back in the most civil of ways. Moving into the year of 2023, Kenichi was quite clearly done with Airi, and so moving forward, he sought to be repaid all of the money she owed him by taking her to court. It does seem that fortune was on his side too, because in December of that year, and after months of court appearances, he would then win the case against her, with the judge ultimately ordering Airi to repay him the full amount plus interest. Sadly, Airi did not care at all, and would even go as far as to mock the lawsuit on stream multiple times, making rude comments about Kenichi and even claiming he was an obsessive anti-fan. The news was sure to leave him extremely upset. To Kenichi, she had been everything, but to her, he was nothing at all. And here is something else that made all of this even worse for him. Because he was watching her streams quite religiously, he knew not only how much she was making from tips, but also from big donations too. With a platinum badge on WhoWatch, she was one of the platform's top streamers at the time. And when you reach that level, well, according to what I can find online, you're looking at roughly 400,000 yen per month, which at the time was approximately $4,000 US. And yet, despite the court ruling, despite everything he had gone through, and despite her newfound success, Kenichi wouldn't see a single yen from her. Also, it's not like Airi was putting any of the money to good use either, because after doing a little bit of online digging, Kenichi was able to find a second Twitter account belonging to her. It is theorized that she tried to keep this account more discreet because, well, the reasons do seem quite obvious. She was a gambler, and she had quite the addiction too. In fact, her very first picture was of her holding a bag full of poker chips with a value of almost 550,000 yen, the equivalent of almost $5,000 at the time. And what do you know? Just like that, Kenichi had his answer. And so, at this point in the story, he was thoroughly trapped. He had borrowed money, drowned himself in debt, and was now living in absolute poverty, all for someone who had played him like a fool. I mean, he had even gone through the legal system and then won his case, but still nothing changed. All he could do was sit there and watch the woman who had manipulated him thrive, still making money, still living her life as if nothing had happened. By the year 2024, he slowly began to emotionally and mentally unravel, and by the year 2025, something inside him snapped, and he had finally made up his mind. On March the 7th, 2025, he sent her one final message saying, "Please give me my money back. I'm in the negative because of all of the loans I borrowed to lend to you, and I can't live now. Can you please somehow pay me back at least 10,000 yen?" Kenichi also told her that he'd been taking a lot of pills and hadn't been sleeping at all that day because of how depressed he was. And, of course, after being vulnerable with her, all she did was ignore him. It was only a few days later that we would reach the day that, tragically, she lost her life. Because on March 11th, 2025, Airi decided to livestream in the Shinjuku area. She wanted to take the opportunity to speak to her fans while out of the property and also check out a few places along the way. Kenichi woke up to see that she was roaming around in Tokyo and would even recognize where she was heading. And so, with this information at hand, he put his shoes on, equipped himself with several knives, and then sadly decided to pay her a little visit. However, he would have to travel into the city first, and so when he left his home, he took the train from Oyama Station, located about 50 miles north, and then rode for nearly 2 hours to Shinjuku. Meanwhile, Airi started her stream near Takodanobaba Station and then made her way towards Shinjuku. Kenichi tried to follow her as he watched her stream, and although she kept moving, he was walking with intent at a faster pace. And then, finally, he found her. Looking into the distance, he could see her standing by her tripod, talking to her audience while she was completely unaware of the impending doom. At the time, Airi had more than 6,000 people tuned in, a very large audience who also were entirely unaware of what was about to happen. Her viewers recall hearing screams, several cries for help, and even a man with a sinister blank look in his eyes. Tragically, there was absolutely nothing they could do. Many tried to ask her questions, while others watched on in horror. And with this being a live stream, we can even see this footage for ourselves. When the police arrived, they found a knife with a 13cm blade tossed by the side of the road. It was covered in blood, and so naturally it was determined to be the murder weapon. After arresting Kenichi, they would also find 2 more knives in his backpack, in case, one wasn't enough. Going back to the live stream for a second, the screen would eventually turn black. Despite the lack of visuals, Airi's viewers could still hear Kenichi repeatedly ask, "Are you dead yet?" On top of that, they could also hear him repeatedly kick her as the sirens grew louder in the distance.
We begin with a crime that has shocked Japan. The brutal killing of an internet personality while she was live streaming on the streets of Tokyo. NHK has learned from investigative sources that the suspect told them he wanted to hurt the victim after he lent her a large sum of money that she failed to return. At the scene of the crime, mourners have placed flowers, drinks, and snacks as a memorial.
I'm sure she had many things she wanted to do with her life. It's heartbreaking.
Seeing news about the death of someone my age is upsetting. I feel sad.
And of course, that is when the authorities arrived and then arrested Kenichi. Soon enough, Airi's autopsy report would confirm that she'd been stabbed more than 30 times across her neck, chest, and shoulders. And with him striking her so many times, it became quite evident to the officers that he held a lot of resentment towards her. As many of you will know, the more times a victim is stabbed usually means the more emotion is involved. With this case happening so recently, Kenichi's fate is yet to be determined. Meanwhile, Airi's is unfortunately obvious. Random side note, but I do find it quite disappointing how often the media failed in this case. If it wasn't for leaked messages, it was false information instead. In fact, many people initially believed it was another Ai Mogami, who in Japan is a popular voice actress. It got so bad that she would even have to post several statements online just to confirm that she was still alive. Since making this video, Kenichi has already spoken to the authorities, sharing his motive. He told the investigators, "I do admit that it was me, but I did not mean to kill her. I lent her more than 2 million yen, about $20,000 relative, for living and other expenses. I made up my mind to attack her because I knew she wouldn't give my money back." Meanwhile, the public's reaction to this case seems to be fairly mixed and complicated actually. This is just my opinion here, but do I think that Airi's behavior was okay? Absolutely not. She manipulated the hell out of this guy. But do I think she deserved to die as a result of her actions and behavior? No, not that either. Although Kenichi initially took the correct course of action, that being through the courts of course, he would then go overboard with murder. I mean, he likely felt extremely overwhelmed, and that there was no way to get out of his ever-growing mountain of debt, which, of course, he blamed solely on Airi. But the truth is, he should have never felt inclined to donate past his means, let alone do it. I do also find it quite interesting how wrong Western media got this story, because if you look on Google, at least at this point in time, you'll find so many articles saying that he was just a lustful fanatic, or even an anti-fan. But of course, as you now know, this case is very different to how the media portrayed it. Our next story today takes us back to the United States and towards a streamer who I'm sure many of you are familiar with. And so, with that said, this is the case of Amouranth. The date was March 2nd, 2025, and given the time of the year, it was a reasonably warm day in Houston. Now, Houston is not just a big city. It's Texas big. It's a city where freeways loop endlessly, humidity clings to you like an old friend, and opportunity stretches as far as the horizon. Did you know that more than 145 languages are spoken here, and the food scene is an absolutely wild adventure, ranging from Vietnamese Cajun crawfish boils right the way through to award-winning Tex-Mex. And like I said, let's not forget the weather, because summers here feel like stepping into a sauna. But one thing I will say about its residents is that all people living in Houston are very resilient. Hurricanes may hit and the traffic may crawl, but it does seem that nothing breaks this city. And it does seem that the people are just as fierce here too, because unfortunately, Houston's violent crime rate is more than 150% higher than the national average. I mean, maybe it's the humidity. Honestly, I feel like Houston's temperatures are high enough to cook anyone's brain. And unfortunately, this story includes 4 bozos who were cooked enough to try and rob one of the world's most famous influencers. And it was all caught on camera. Now, if I say the name Amouranth, I'm sure that many of you will vaguely know who I'm talking about, and I'm sure all of you would have never thought you'd see a story about her on this channel. Well, unfortunately, she ran into some trouble earlier this month. So, for those of you who don't know who Amouranth is, she's a streamer who has more than 6 million followers online, and has been in the news for some quite controversial reasons. And so, before we dive into the crime, let's first take a look at who she is and how she found herself in the middle of a gunfight. Caitlin Siragusa, who is publicly known as Amouranth, was always a dreamer. Born on December 2nd, 1993 in Houston, Texas, she spent most of her childhood fascinated by art, gaming, and animals. Creativity was always her passion, and so it's no surprise that it wasn't long before she jumped into the world of costume design and cosplay. In 2015, and at the age of 22, she founded her own character company. Soon after, Twitch would ask her to join as a content creator, where she would go on to livestream making costumes and trying them out. Under the name of Amouranth, she invited viewers into her world, sharing everything from her cosplay creation process to gaming, dancing, ASMR, and then adult hot tub streaming. It was her personality and diverse content that quickly captivated audiences, and by the year of 2021, she had amassed a staggering following of more than 6 million followers, solidifying herself as one of the most watched female streamers on the Twitch platform. However, there were interesting complications to her journey too. Pushing the boundaries of content creation guidelines would mean facing the repercussions of platform policies, and sometimes that would even include suspensions. By now, she had also moved into the world of OnlyFans, where she had earned more than $33 million through the platform. There is a lot of debate around OnlyFans, but regardless of whether you are for or against it, there is no denying that she dominated the adult content creation community. In 2021, she announced the purchase of a gas station, and only a few months later, would even acquire an inflatable pool toy company. In addition to this, recognizing a need within her industry, she would also launch a matchmaking service to connect other content creators with personal assistance. Once again, she knew how to build wealth and community. As an avid animal lover, she also expressed her dream of establishing an animal sanctuary, which is a passion project that highlights her softer nature. By 2023, she hosted the 2023 XBiz Creator Awards, the same award ceremony that the victim of our previous video, Amy Harwick, attended. She also signed a deal with Kick, which of course is Twitch's competitor. All of Caitlin's numbers do seem to be astronomical. 3.8 million followers on X, 6.2 million on Twitch, and more than $20 million in crypto, which we know because she posted this tweet online. However, off-camera, Amouranth was facing personal struggles too. She had recently revealed her problematic marriage, broken mental health, and the many pressures she faced as an online personality. In fact, our case today would only happen because of this popularity. And that takes us to the date of March 2nd, 2025, the time 10:51 p.m. It was during that moment that Amouranth was in bed trying to sleep, and that is when she suddenly woke up to the sound of 2 large thuds coming from downstairs beneath her. She wasn't quite sure what it was, but it sounded like someone was breaking in. And it certainly wasn't her dogs or her husband, Nick. Now, I think we've all been in this situation before, where we hear random noises in our home while we're alone, and our mind immediately skips to intruders or possibly even ghosts. Well, for Caitlin, this was no Casper situation. It was the real deal. Scrambling to find her phone, she then called Nick to find out where he was. And although he said that he was in fact on the property, he was in another building across the driveway. Moments later, those thuds turned into a violent crash, and then only a couple seconds after that, Caitlin found herself in the middle of a hostage situation. Before she even knew it, 3 masked men had smashed through the sliding door beneath her, and seconds later, they were in her room with a gun pointed towards her head. They screamed at her to stand up. She had no idea what they wanted. Caitlin was then pistol whipped multiple times, and that is when they revealed their motive. One of the men shouting, "Where is the crypto?" It seems that they were after her money, and this was only days after she had posted about her cryptocurrency. However, what they didn't know at the time is that while all of this was going on, Amouranth was still on the phone to her husband, who was listening in on the other end. With all of the screaming, threats, and hitting heard throughout the phone call, Nick had all of the information he needed. That is when he retreated to the bathroom to find a Staccato CS firearm, before then sliding on some underwear and equipping his Kevlar vest. But setting all of this up would unfortunately take a minute or two, and so Caitlin would have to sit tight for now. In the meantime, she was cornered, and all eyes were on her to answer their question, where she was keeping her cryptocurrency. I'm sure that most of you know what it is by now, but for those who don't, crypto is a virtual currency that operates on the blockchain without a central bank. So, I mean, honestly, I have no idea what these thugs were thinking, because it's not like she could magically open up a special briefcase and then give them some kind of golden USB stick. Having this much crypto locked up on the platform was much more complicated than that. It was at this moment that Caitlin realized that she was not dealing with rational or logical people, and so, with that in mind, she devised her own plan instead. She was going to play their game and lead them to where they think she might be holding the magical crypto. Meanwhile, Nick was the man with all of the intel. Not only could he hear Caitlin and the intruders through her phone, but interestingly enough, he had total surveillance of them too, with multiple cameras being placed throughout the property, both indoors and outdoors. Soon after, a kitchen surveillance camera would capture one of the men pulling her by the hair to keep her close by. The other two men seemed to be trailing behind them, shouting at her for the crypto.
Stop playing!
No, it's across the lake.
Stop playing!
It's across the lake.
Go!
Okay, let's go.
Hey, yeah, the camera shit was I'm taking the phone.
Caitlin then led them throughout the kitchen, across the driveway, and towards the building that she knew Nick was in. It is worth noting here that Nick and Caitlin did not have any direct communication with each other at this stage. But despite this, it does look like they both knew exactly what the other person was thinking. Their understanding of each other here was really impressive, to be honest, and it does make you wonder what would have happened if neither of them knew what to do. A surveillance camera then captures Caitlin and the three men behind her arriving at his man cave. That is when she opens the external door, walks inside, and the other three follow her in pursuit.
Oh, in here. It's in here.
Come on! Go!
Opening the door gave way to the bottom of the staircase, in which Caitlin then pushed herself against the wall and looked up. And standing there at the top of the stairway, in nothing but his underwear and a Kevlar vest, her husband Nick stood tall and ready, his handgun pointed directly at the intruders behind her. After calling his wife to duck, he then shouted something similar to "duck you," before then firing 3 shots at the men behind her. Although he was technically the one without any trousers on, it is quite ironic that the robbers who were actually the ones to be caught with their pants down. And by that, I mean completely taken by surprise. And as soon as the 3 shots were fired, they then U-turned and sprinted out of the building, the surveillance camera capturing them running away into the distance, while one of them screamed, "I've been shot, I've been hit." At the end of the gunfight, Nick had 2 options from here. He could either chase after the men or get his wife to safety. He chose the latter, pulling her upstairs and placing her in the panic room, before then barricading himself and calling the police. He would also use her Twitter account to say, "I'm being robbed at gunpoint. This is not a prank. Help." Now, this was actually quite a smart move made by Nick, but for the dumbest of reasons. With Caitlin being Amouranth, she receives not only a lot of love online, but a lot of hate from strangers too, and that includes being swatted several times by anti-fans. To clarify, swatting is when someone makes a fake call to the police to try and get them to attend a property for a major offense, often leading to that target being ambushed by officers. And so, with that in mind, Nick figured that if he wanted the police to believe him, then he had to try and make this as official as possible, therefore using Caitlin's Twitter to verify. Only a few minutes later, several police officers arrived, where they then secured the scene and confirmed that all intruders had run away.
Tonight, we are hearing from a Houston area influencer who was chased down, held up at gunpoint, even pistol whipped inside her home. The whole thing, it was caught on surveillance video.
The armed robbers came looking for tens of millions of dollars in cryptocurrency. They left with a bullet wound.
I hear two loud crashes coming from below my master, but I didn't think it was the dogs. It was very loud. And I told him, well, somebody is coming in here right now. And then as soon as I said that, they kicked down the door. They keep saying, where's the crypto? Where's the crypto?
Caitlin was pistol whipped a total of 3 times, so she decided to play along. The couple believes the attackers may have been drawn to the home after a post was made on Amouranth's social media showing a screenshot of her $20 million in cryptocurrency that she held at the time, but nobody can say for certain.
Now, this story could have ended so differently if Nick and Caitlin hadn't responded so well, and thankfully, Nick's surprise attack was so compelling against all 3 intruders. However, unknown to any of them at the time, it turns out that they would actually bump into one of their attackers again later that evening. The one item to be taken from the property appeared to be Caitlin's MacBook, and so, in a panic, she tracked its location using the Find My function. And well, that is when she realized that the MacBook had actually pinged at the same hospital where she herself had received treatment. This means that the MacBook and one of the intruders must have gone to the hospital. This also means that it is very likely she could have directly seen one of the attackers while at the hospital, completely unaware that he had tried to rob her only a few hours prior. As a result of being pushed around, pistol whipped and then beaten, Caitlin seemed to suffer bruising to her head and her hands. So far, scans have shown no severe injuries, but it is also worth noting that she required 3 stitches on the left side of her head. So, what precisely was the motive? Well, it is theorized that Caitlin was targeted by her attackers after she had revealed her crypto wallet on social media, asking fans, "Help, do I sell or hold?" The image she posted shows her holding over $20 million worth of Bitcoin, which, by no stretch of the imagination, is a huge number. So, that creates a motive, but how did they find out where she lived? Well, that part is not yet so clear. According to Amouranth, she is very careful in not leaking her address online. However, keeping that sort of thing private is very difficult in the long term, and moving, well, it's just extremely time-consuming and frustrating. Judging by the lack of intelligence from her attackers, I wouldn't be surprised if they simply knew her address through happenstance, and then felt like they had a golden opportunity after seeing her Bitcoin numbers online. Speaking of, officers were first to arrest what they believed as the getaway driver, and then, only a couple of days later, arrested the 3 men which they believed were the ones seen in the surveillance footage. So, how precisely did they track them down? Well, the initial investigation would lead detectives to an apartment complex after surveillance video and a report of a stolen vehicle provided multiple key leads. A resident had reported stolen license plates from 2 vehicles, and while canvassing the area, investigators discovered school paperwork with the name DeMarcus Mori, that being half the name of one of the potential suspects. Shortly after this, there were reports of a dark-colored Toyota, which seemed to match the description of the same vehicle used during the home invasion. And then, shortly after, on March the 5th, license plate cameras would capture the vehicle in traffic. The following day, a trooper would stop that Toyota in Galveston County when the driver of the car failed to use a turn signal. That is when the driver, named Salazar Guerrero, was arrested for not having a license. It is also noted that during the search of the vehicle, cops found a large bloodstain in the rear passenger seat. While being questioned, Salazar would eventually admit to being the getaway driver during that home invasion. He would also confess that his friend, Campbell, coordinated the crime, and that he, at the time, did not know the other 2 suspects. He would also admit to driving in exchange for his own cut of the cryptocurrency, and confirmed that he had dropped off one of the suspects at the hospital after Nick had shot him. So, with that said, officers now had DeMarcus Morris Jr., Dylan Nesho Campbell, and Brian Anthony Salazar Guerrero, all between the ages of 17 and 19. And by the way, the 4th suspect remains unnamed due to his age being 16 years old. With all 4 suspects now finally arrested, they have all received charges of aggravated kidnapping and aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. So, I think it's kind of obvious, but I guess we'll see where this goes in the future.
2 of 4 teenagers charged with assaulting and trying to steal Bitcoin from a popular influencer, Amouranth. Well, they were in court today as well. Now, Amouranth says that 3 men broke into her home in Northwest Harris County earlier this month, pistol whipped her, and also demanded cryptocurrency. Well, today, 17-year-old DeMarcus Morris and 18-year-old Dylan Campbell were charged with aggravated kidnapping and aggravated robbery with a deadly weapon. Now, 19-year-old Brian Guerrero bonded out last week. A 16-year-old has also been identified as a suspect in this case.
Although the crypto heist failed to materialize, it did unfortunately come with several consequences to Caitlin and her husband Nick. PTSD and future emotional complications aside, Nick was now forced to reveal his identity, which up until this point in time had remained anonymous to the world. It is true that this may actually work well for them, because now both Caitlin and Nick can be on stream together, which is something that they were never able to do in the past. It could also possibly backfire on Caitlin's OnlyFans business. And Nick, well, he is negatively affected too. Nick was at the center of some controversy only a couple of years prior, but at the time was kind of protected because he remained anonymous. However, now there is a face and a name to Amouranth's husband, he might receive some fresh heat. Humans were never designed to be so hyper-connected to each other, but thanks to technology, we're only a few clicks away from billions of people. This is particularly difficult for any of those who are well known online, especially if their career depends on them sharing details about their lives. When it comes to big and obvious things like where you live, it can be extremely difficult to try and outsmart millions of people in the long run. And unfortunately, that is the predicament that Nick and Caitlin found themselves in. I mean, for example, how many people live with a green G-Wagon on a ranch in Texas? Not many, I assume. I also think that maybe it wasn't a good idea to share your crypto earnings online because you never know how someone's going to react. But at least this lesson learned did not have any permanent consequences. Now, despite the robbery, charges, bruises, and injuries, some people believe that this was staged and all merely done for clout. Personally, I don't think those rumors are true, but you believe what you want. I'm just glad that no one died and everything will eventually return to normal. And with that said, I think I'll end this case and video here today, folks. Before I go though, I'd love to know what you think about not only this compilation, but also including these sorts of stories. So, as always, please share your thoughts in the comments down below. By the way, if you'd like to support me in the channel, then please check out my social media here, or alternatively, my Patreon. And also, thank you so much for making it this far, I really do appreciate you. With that said, I'll see you again very soon for another video, likely next week now. So, until that moment arrives, please remember to look after yourselves, look after each other, and as always, stay safe. Thank you, and goodbye.